This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of people with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 305, Project Browser. Welcome to Talking Drupal. Today we're talking about the Project Browser initiative with Chris Wells. Chris is the CTO and founding member of Redfin Solutions, LLC, based in Portland, Maine. They've been working with Drupal since version 4.7 and have never looked back. Outside of Drupal, Chris lives with his wife, 3 kids, and old dog Copper, and enjoys camping, disc golf, and playing music. Welcome to the show, and thank you for joining us. I'm Nick, and today my co-hosts are John Picozzi with EPAM. What's new with you this week?
So on last week's show, dear listener, if you haven't listened, we had Preston. So Preston was the keynote speaker at Design for Drupal, which I attended on Friday, and it was wonderful. And I actually, Chris led a discussion about the project browser at Design for Drupal, and here we are today. So, props to Design for Drupal for bringing people together and having interest, giving us interesting things to talk about.
Awesome. And joining us for the second time is Amy June Heinlein. What's new with you?
I am away from home, which is always nice because I live in a really, really rural spot. And I traveled through the Redwoods for 10, 15 hours for a 6-hour trip to go up to Southern Oregon. So that was really exciting. Did some geocaching, found a lot of banana slugs, actually introduced someone from New York to banana slugs because they did not know what I was talking about. So that was sort of a unique experience because I have to remember that I have the privilege of living in the Redwoods, and that's where banana slugs are, and not everyone lives in the Redwoods. So that was an interesting experience, like having him lick it, and I don't know if viewers. Yeah, if you lick a banana slug, your tongue turns numb.
Doesn't sound like a feature.
It's not a feature; it's a bug.
No, it's a slug.
Oh.
I was setting you up for that, John.
Sorry.
Okay, I have to say for our listeners, we're not advocating licking random slugs unless you know what they are.
Well, and this is, again, a privilege of growing up in Northern California, is I know that that's okay because we did like outdoor education camps, like in the 6th and 7th grade, where the kids from the city go into the woods and do things for the first time. And us like 3 kids were like, hey, look, a banana slug. And they did, and their tongue turned numb. So
interesting.
So for our listeners, the Wikipedia page for banana slugs is going to be in the show notes. You can find banana slugs apparently in California, Oregon, and a variation of them in Alaska, California, Idaho, Oregon, Washington, and parts of Canada. So there you go.
Yeah. As you say that, I remember my friend in Oregon who talked about licking banana slugs.
Well,
growing up.
I went to UCSC for a few years. That's University of California, Santa Cruz. And our mascot is actually the banana slug.
Oh, that's pretty cool. So do you just tell people to go lick a banana slug when you want them to stop talking? Or
Well, it's not something that's brought up in everyday conversation, but when I was traveling, I was drinking coffee the whole time. And so I was very caffeinated. And by the time I met this person I went on a little walk, like on a scenic byway. And I was sitting there drinking my coffee, and I saw banana slugs on the tree. And this person came up and was looking over. And I asked him how his morning was and if he wanted some of my coffee. And I noticed he had a East Coast accent. And so that's when I asked him if he knew what a banana slug was. I wasn't going to mention the licking part, but because I had so much energy running through and very excited because I hadn't talked to anyone in a couple hours. And there's more to banana slugs that I can share, but this isn't a show about banana slugs.
I feel like we should have a podcast episode about this. A couple questions there. Did he actually lick it?
No.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
All right.
Well, they were actually in the midst of doing their thing to procreate.
Then that's less disappointing.
The banana slugs. Gotcha.
Yeah. So,
I was going to say this person seemed very, very trusting and it kind of restored my faith in humanity if this guy just picked up a slug and was like, all right.
No, it was a science lesson because we talked about how slugs are hermaphrodites and all that kind of stuff.
Huh.
So
yeah, slugs are weird. I think this might be on my bucket list now, Looking at banana slug and seeing how numb my tongue will get.
Next time I'm in California, I'm going to have to find one of them there banana slugs.
They're all over. Like if you go in the woods outside Bad Camp. So you should come to Bad Camp one year and
all right,
go for a walk.
I can make that happen.
So Chris, what's new with you this week?
Well, it dovetails nicely off of Amy June's traveling. So the big thing with us is in about a week and a half, my wife and I and 3 kids and our old dog Copper are headed out west in a brand new 32-foot RV that we just obtained. And we're going out for 3 weeks out to the West Coast. So we're headed out from Buffalo, around Chicago, Fargo, and out west. We're going to do Glacier National Park, the Oregon coast, a couple of inland Oregon sites, Yellowstone, and then back through Iowa, the Field of Dreams, and headed back home. So over 3 weeks, I'll be out. I'll be kind of working half-time remotely. We've got Wi-Fi in the camper and a cellular antenna going on and a Verizon 4G LTE plan, and we're going to see how it goes and hit some campgrounds and see some of this great nation. So that's been occupying quite a bit of my time as a way to finance the trip. We got the RV and then we started renting it on like a sort of the Airbnb of RVs called Outdoorsy.
Right.
So that's taken up a lot of time delivering the RV to sites and getting people set up in it. But that's been a whirlwind this summer, is becoming brand new to RVing.
Wait a second. Delivering the RV to sites, so people aren't coming to like your house and camping in your backyard in the RV. You're going to like different places.
Yeah, so most people on Outdoorsy are expecting to like drive the RV, but it's literally brand new. We're not letting that happen. So we offer delivery, and so they'll rent a campsite somewhere, 90 minutes of where we are in southern Maine, and we'll drive it there and drop it off. So we have a drop off in Conway in the White Mountains at the end of this week, and then another drop off in Salisbury, Mass next week. And then we pick it up again the day before we leave. So we're going to have a day to clean it up and pack it for our own trip and then get out of here.
So has that been a viable strategy? I mean, I always wonder if those things work out.
Yeah, I think more than, it's not year round, it's pretty seasonal, but we've certainly made more than the payment on the RV, each month during the season. So that'll help us sort of offset the cost and pay for the trip that's going to be several thousand miles. So it's been a cool new experience, and it gives me, like, I always want to be learning something new. So this has totally occupied that part of my brain where I want to learn about all the different systems in an RV. And it's a good segue to learning more about the systems in your home, because they're simplified versions of that, plumbing and electrical and stuff. So it's kind of cool.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Yeah, I've always wanted to do a big RV trip. Maybe in a few years, we'll see.
Yeah.
So for me this week, mine's a little more work related. We had Matt on a few months ago to talk about Tugboat, I think episode 283. And I have a client that has been very interested in Tugboat, and we finally started setting it up last week. I have to say, it has blown every expectation out of the water. Every time we have a question about something, the answer is yes, it's already supported. So we have this client has I don't want to go too much into the details, but this client has a fairly unique setup. They have several different sites that are running on Platform SH, and Tugboat doesn't have an official integration with Platform SH, but it took probably a half an hour's worth of work with one of their engineers to get, the full backup and sync up and running with Platform. Dead simple. And over the last couple of days, I keep getting pinged in Slack because the client is making modifications. Like, for example, they've already hooked it up to Slack, I think, so that, when somebody does a build, we get a notification that it's been started and finished if there's an error. I think that this is really going to streamline things for that client. So really excited about Tugboat. It's a great team, and I'm sure I'll have more updates in the future.
Nick, you said their engineers. You mean Tugboat's engineers?
Yeah. So James, who works for Tugboat, jumped on a call with me to kind of work through a couple of, the onboarding process. I think it's one of the services that they offer. And like I said, within about, I think we were on the call for about an hour, and it took us about half an hour to kind of get the groundwork laid. And the other thing is, going from one site to another was easier in Tugboat than most other services. So like setting up a platform SH site, even though I know what I'm doing, I've done it many times before, it takes a couple of hours. Once we got Tugboat up and running for the first site for this client, setting up the second site took me about 10 minutes. And then I was doing a demo for 3 or 4 of the engineers that work for that client, just to say like, here's what we got so far. Here's what we're expecting in the future. And then I was like, hey, setup is super easy. By the end of the week, I'm going to be setting up, these other 2 sites. And I was like, why don't we just do a live demo of setting it up? So on a whim, I set up a third application for them using Tugboat in about 10 minutes and, went without a hitch. So it's a great platform, and it's very quick, it's very efficient, and it's gonna, like I said, for this particular client, it's gonna solve a lot of pain points.
Very cool.
Yeah,
I'm very excited about Tugboat. It sounds epic, and it's just, it's a little too far down the list for right now, but it's very cool.
After you learn about RVs, you can learn about Tugboat.
Yeah. As soon as that's over.
I would encourage you to carve out a couple of hours. So to give you a little bit of background, this client started the discussion very quickly after the episode with Matt, actually. But, a couple of priorities, there were other priorities that kept jumping up. Once we sat down and actually dug into it, it was very quick to get up and running. So I would say you just need half a day, and you should be able to get most of your stuff up and running. I mean, and that it's really good at incremental updates. So you don't have to get everything polished and up and running. Getting like a basic setup, you can get that done in, like I said, half a day. Easy.
Cool.
So this week we have another module of the week. I think, John, this is your module.
Yes, and I'm absolutely appalled that we have not talked about this module. But again, coming out of Design for Drupal and Chris's discussion on Project Browser, we were talking about modules that we install. Like, first thing, when you install a Drupal site, what modules do you install first? And Admin Toolbar is at the top of the list, right? I always install Admin Toolbar. Has great set of features. Basically turns the Drupal admin menu into a set of drop downs, so that way you can see all of the sub things underneath them. Makes it really, really, really easy to find things that are nested in those lists. A lot easier than having to click, wait for a page load, click, wait for a page load. Also has other sub modules in it. One is a search bar for Drupal, the Drupal admin, which is useful. And then the last one is, or the last two is, one is an enhancement for flushing cache and doing more admin tasks. And then the last is access permissions. So that way you can set more granular access permissions on the items, or who has access to items within the admin toolbar. So that's pretty useful, especially if you want to use admin toolbar with clients. So hasn't been a module of the week yet. So I figured we would solve that problem.
I mean, it's definitely one of the modules that I install no matter what.
I don't set up websites very often, and when I do, I'm always surprised that it's not in core. Always. It always throws me for a loop that it's just not there.
Like Path Auto. Well, like, why isn't Path Auto in core? Like, there's so many modules that I just kind of scratch my head.
Well, Path Auto, redirect. Yeah, there's a few. But it's immensely useful. If you've never used it, highly recommended.
If only there were an easier way in core to see modules and potentially install them.
So speaking of that, Chris, can you give us the elevator pitch for what the Project Browser initiative is?
Well, hold on, because I'm still taking notes on the modules that you said are always at the top of your list, because that's an important piece for us to know. So Project Browser, the idea is exactly what John said. What if there were a way to look at, sort of shop for, or browse for modules without leaving your site, and seeing what kinds of enhancements and flexibility and extensions we can add on to Drupal from within Drupal. Right now that process is a little complicated, and we think that we're losing a lot of people who managed to get Drupal installed. They've chosen Drupal, at least to the point where they know they want to evaluate it. Maybe they used a one-click installer on GoDaddy or a Droplet or something that will get them Drupal. And then they say, okay, now what? I need some of this functionality that we as developers sort of roll into every site, admin toolbar, path auto, redirect, some of these like really popular things that are really important. So how do we hold their hand a little bit and guide them through the process? One way that it was kind of explained is like the Easy Out of the Box initiative is there to help people, get Drupal installed and make it user friendly out of the box. And to some extent, this is a little bit of an extension of that. Is like, well, now that you've gotten to that point, your very next step is I want to extend the functionality of my site. And what's an easier way to do that without having to go to Drupal.org, having to sort of shop for modules and figure out to some extent on your own or with guidance, you need someone else's guidance to help you understand like which of these modules are good, and what is the criteria for that. So those are some of the problems that we're kind of trying to solve by helping to recommend certain modules, or at least give people some sort of rubric for understanding, why they should or should not install particular modules.
So do you also foresee it being a way for module maintainers or people that create a new module to add discoverability for their modules? Because we had Matthew Scarset on a few episodes ago to talk about a couple of modules that he was working on. One of the things he said was difficult was just letting people know that a module exists for a particular use case. Is that something that you see this helping with as well?
That is certainly a hope and a long-term goal. We have a user story sort of captured for that from the persona of a module developer being able to get exposure for their module. We're still in very formative stages of understanding what sort of needs to go in the MVP and what might be a longer-term goal. That probably feels like a longer-term goal, but having you go to the Apple App Store and you can see that there's, featured modules and sort of a rotating banner. And some of that is totally, not necessarily out of the scope of this project. So I could see that being a great utility for that.
We know what the project is, but what's the history and how did the initiative get started, Chris?
Yeah, I pinned the sort of spark moment for this. There was an idea in the ideas queue, and I honestly don't know which came first, but when it really was started to gain attention in the community was at the Dries note at the 2021 North America DrupalCon, and Dries talked a lot about this idea of the project browser. Dries looking at a lot of, I hate to use the word competition, but it kind of makes sense. Looking at other CMSs that are out there, they overcame this hurdle by shipping some sort of project browser or extension or plugin browser inside the CMS. And it seemed like we were kind of one of the only projects not doing that, and sending people off to Drupal.org to do their shopping. And so to him, it was kind of a no-brainer. So after the Dries note, it kind of it gained a little more steam and started rolling up. And then I ended up seeing a tweet about first meeting for Project Browser Initiative. I think it was Dries's tweet, and I kind of hopped in there and got started. So.
Right.
So I think you just answered my next question as to how you were made the co-lead of the initiative.
Well, that was a little bit more of a process, but I think for me, Redfin has been using Drupal since 4.7. I mean, I think it was probably 2005 or 6. So we've been using Drupal for years and years and years, and it's given so much to us. And, we're a pretty bootstrapped agency. We don't take, venture capital or anything, and, we've gotten to a place where, we can start contributing back. And it's been something that's been on my mind for the last few years is, in a lot of ways, I found it very difficult to sort of contribute back piecemeal. One of my first introductions to contributing in a very organized way that made me feel comfortable was working on getting RDF into Drupal core in Drupal 8. There were sort of weekly mini sprints. There were 5 or 6 of us working on it, and we had Stefan Corlosquet leading that score, and Kay Van Valkenburg had sort of invited me in and said, if you're interested in a way to contribute, we're doing this kind of weekly thing. And that was really great. And then when that sort of fell off, when Drupal 8 came out, I was sort of poking my head in different places. I tried to poke my head in the decoupled menus. It didn't work out for me. I tried to poke my head in Olivero. It didn't really work out. And so when I saw this tweet that said, come to our first meeting, I was like, ooh, I can get in at the ground floor here. I'm absolutely willing to put in the time. I have the time and the resources to be able to dedicate to it. So I jumped in and I stayed in. And when there was, calls for leadership, I threw my hat in the ring. And so at a meeting a few weeks ago, I was meeting with Dries and a couple other folks talking about sort of scoping and defining sort of the project brief of this initiative. And, Dries said, having heard from everyone, it was myself and Ron who had really stepped up and said, we're willing to take this on. So he said, okay, I'll appoint you the sort of co-initiative leads. And, I was honored to be a part. I'm so happy to finally contribute in a really meaningful and kind of big way back to the project. I've been sort of yearning for this for a few years, and I think this is a good opportunity. And I think Ron and I have similar skill sets, but different strengths. So, we're kind of learning from each other what's good for each of us. And so I'm doing a lot more of the note taking and documentation and some of that, and he's doing a lot more running the meetings and that sort of stuff, weekly meetings. So it's working out well. He was on vacation last week, so I was kind of spearheaded our weekly meeting. But yeah, it's been great, and I'm so happy. And again, like I said, honored to kind of be that part. Now, and with that said, I want to point out that the way leadership is kind of organized inside of Drupal initiatives is the Drupal governance says that Dries will appoint initiative leads, but there's still more opportunity for leadership inside the initiative. So the leads are the only formal roles that are appointed by Dries, but inside of that, we're still looking for people to step into leadership roles inside the project, and that part is not finalized at all.
So just to clarify, that's Ron Northcutt for people who don't know who the other lead is. I know that this initiative is just getting off the ground. I think we've only been meeting for a month or so. Who else is playing a part in the initiative?
Well, Amy June Heinlein has been instrumental in showing up to all of our meetings and providing valuable feedback. So have a lot of other folks. Leslie Glynn, also from Redfin, has stepped in to help out with site builders. Andrew Olson from Bounteous has been great, and he helped us lead our focus groups at Design for Drupal. Mihaela Portaluca is her Drupal username. I'm not even going to try to say her last name because I don't remember it, for one. And if I try, I will butcher it. I know it starts with a J. Tim, there is a Tim who is in the chat, in the project browser chat channel on Slack, and he's provided really great insights and really good enthusiasm for the project. I don't know his last name, but we just call him Little T Tim to differentiate him from Tim Lennon, or Hestenet is his username, from the Drupal Association. He's been super helpful in sort of playing the liaison role between us and the association, because a lot of the things that we're going to have to do is we're going to have to improve Drupal.org's content and also content architecture for projects. We're going to have to update metadata, maybe add some new fields, revise a bunch of the content and tagging on those projects in order to make the data useful to site builders. So yeah, we have a lot of great people involved.
I have a lot of questions around that. The first one I think I'll ask, though, is kind of about the metadata piece. I mean, one of the, if you take aside the part having to go to another site to find projects, one of the things that's always been somewhat painful is just sometimes knowing the name of a module. So for example, there's some that you hear it, you know what it does. Like scheduler is pretty easy to assume it has something to do with scheduling something, right? But then you have things like Chaos Tools Suite or C Tools. And at least in Drupal 7, that was integral. I mean, you didn't have a site that didn't have that installed, or even panels or views. Like views is ubiquitous. Like it made it in core for Drupal 8. You use it all the time, but it doesn't describe. I mean, it technically describes what it does, but it's not like somebody coming to the site is like, I need to create a list of things. Let me look for views. So how are you thinking about the problem of kind of wrangling that? Because it's not, that's not a small task. There's thousands and thousands of modules.
It's about 47,000 modules. Yeah.
Give or take.
Yeah. I know, because I scraped the API and built a spreadsheet of every module so that we could start to collect some data on this stuff. So yeah, there's around 47,000. It's a big question, and it's one that's become very, very clear to me over the last few weeks as we keep discussing about it. Like, this project is not going to have success until we make sure that we clean up and sort of formalize the data on Drupal.org. And so we're looking at it currently from a perspective of, like, where we're at right now is we're trying to sort of wireframe out what we think is like the ideal MVP scenario, so that we can get to like a 1.0 release of the project browser in the contrib space. And we're going to be working towards that MVP, but we're still in the formative stages where we're trying to define what's inside that MVP and what's outside of it. And one thing that, like I said, is becoming clear to me is the MVP is going to rely on a few changes on Drupal.org, even if that means without any architectural changes. It's going to mean that the first paragraph of every project description is going to have to be a friendly, or even the summary of the project description is going to have to be a friendly, short description of what this module is and does. And another big component of that is the categorization of modules. Right now, it's up to the module maintainer to sort of choose what categories their project belongs to. First of all, some of those categories are not necessarily even still valid and useful. One of the major categories is CCK, which hasn't been a thing since Drupal 6, right?
6 or 5, yeah, 6. Yeah.
When fields and field UI went into core in 7, I believe, and so we need to clean up those categories, and I think we probably need to force a limit on the number of categories that a project can belong to. For example, some module maintainers have said, hey, I want my project to show up wherever and whatever people look for. And so they've tagged it with 50 categories, a social sharing module is tagged in commerce, right? And that doesn't really help people find things that they're trying to find that are in the Drupal commerce ecosystem, and so one idea that I've just been rolling around in my head, and I don't know if this is how it will come to fruition, but I'm trying to come up with some sort of sub-initiative or community-based initiative that is like Project Cleanup, where a community of volunteers, and this is a really great way to contribute in a very meaningful way to Drupal, is to propose new project descriptions and new categorization and other things for projects and file an issue saying, I rewrote your description according to some new standards that perhaps we came up with. And here's the changes that I think you should make. And it's really easy then for a maintainer to sort of copy and paste, give credit to the person who came up with that. And I think that there's some sort of side component where, that piece is very important to the success of this project. And I think there's a Drupal marketing initiative going on right now that is trying to make Drupal more user-friendly to newcomers. And I think, a good sort of tag team might be some sort of sub-initiative, community initiative between project browser and marketing, and, to get together and throw some resources at something like that. That's not been discussed. That's an idea that's strictly in my head, but we need something along those lines to deal with the data that we're looking at, for sure.
Back a few years ago, there was that initiative to standardize the READMEs in contributed modules. And so we came up with documentation and templates and stuff like that. And that was mentioned in a meeting, like maybe coming up with this documentation page where folks who are new to contributing or don't code necessarily, because this is a non-coding thing that people can get involved with and helping with this template. And then an extension of that is when that's done, people can use that template and suggest changes for those project pages. So
I think that's great. My next question, though, is kind of in a slightly different direction and a bit more technical. I think there's another really big, it sounds like this initiative, one of the things it's trying to solve is Drupal 7 was great at that kind of like almost point and click, build a simple site and then make it more complex as you need to. And somebody who traditionally wasn't a developer could bootstrap themselves to a successful complex site. And I think Drupal 8, while it has a great starting point for simpler sites, kind of lost that middle ground, like the in-between phase. Like Drupal 8 is great for a dead simple site, is great for a really complex site. And it's kind of lost that middle ground for people that are just kind of point and clicking their way to building that intermediate site. And I think one of the really big reasons for that is Composer. Mm-hmm. Because there's a lot of overhead, a lot to learn if you're not somebody who works with command line tools every day. Like that's a huge barrier to entry. So I think first off, I imagine that this project browser is incompatible with Composer, but I have to imagine that there has to be some thought in how Composer fits into this. Yeah. Have you even started that thought process? Or
absolutely, we have. And the guiding principle that I will probably paraphrase, but Dries has described the project browser as a simple way for site builders to find and install modules. So the end goal of this is point and click installation of modules in Drupal. Okay. And his Dries note was absolutely focused on what he called, getting back to Drupal's roots. So we're really trying to introduce or reintroduce no code and low code solutions for Drupal. Yeah, that's absolutely part of this initiative. But where we're at right now is that there is another strategic initiative happening, which is the automatic updates initiative, which will actually, perform security updates on your site. And fundamentally, they're using Composer under the hood to update the Drupal site. And that's what we're looking ahead to. And so we want to dovetail off that work. It's a small leap from running Composer update to running Composer install. So we have looked at that is a more of a phase 2 type of endeavor for us, is that we're hoping to we are going to get to a point where you can click install from inside the project browser and your module shows up. That's a primary goal here, but we're going to capitalize on some of that work. And so our MVP phase 1 is when you click install, you're going to get probably like a modal pop-up, which says to install with Composer, here's the command you can run. To install with Drush, here's the command you can run. Okay. To download manually, click this link and you'll get the tarball, something like that to sort of bridge the gap.
That's fantastic. And I have to say, if you do integrate with Composer the way the automatic updates is, you will save us and other agencies and other developers massive amounts of headaches, I imagine, as these companies grow and need a agency to help them get to the next stage. Because otherwise I've converted non-Composer Drupal 8 sites to Composer, and that's always fun. but I have to say, I think getting back to the roots, like you said, Teresa's talk, like that really feels like the roots of Drupal. I mean, Drupal 7, Drupal 6, even Drupal 5 to some extent was very much like that's how I started. My first few sites were like that. I just downloaded Drupal and then just point and clicked and used modules, used feeds to build, imports and all that kind of stuff. Everything was done in the UI, and being able to reintroduce that back into the Drupal ecosystem, I think can only be positive.
Yeah. I mean, I really feel that pendulum swing pretty hard because, it was a massive overhaul from 7 to 8. You built a separate D8 site, you migrated the stuff in. Those were completely different paradigms. Now look where we're headed. The upgrade from 8 to 9 is totally in place again. It's like going from 5 to 6 or 6 to 7, so, we're swinging back, we're getting back to our roots. And I think it's, we're headed forward in the realm of things like even Squarespace or Wix, or even looking at the Apple App Store. You have this device in front of you, have this phone in front of you, and you say, I want to extend its functionality. You go to an app store and you say, I want this.
Yeah.
And that's the experience that modern users are looking for, and that's the experience we're trying to provide.
Yeah,
I'm excited.
That all sounds really, really great. And the idea that you're trying to dovetail and use the composer, the composer backend is, makes it even more appealing, in my opinion, because that's the last thing I would want, is for somebody to start and, kind of click their way around, build something to a point, and then go to, one of us or somebody else or whoever and say like, oh, here's my site, and have them like be like, well, I can't really use this because I'm using a composer workflow, and like we need to use that to like expand this out to, the masses. So the big question, Chris Wells, do you have an estimated timeline for when we could possibly see an experimental module in core? Or I do notice that the project browser has a module page right now, and there is looks to be a development 1X version on there. But when could we possibly see this as an experimental core module?
Yeah, and I would say I have literally no idea. And I'm not going to bless you with any kind of sense of that right now. We're still very, very early. We've had about 6 or 8 meetings, I think. It was sort of the beginning of June, or maybe May 27th was kind of and it's July 27th today as we record. So, it's been a couple months. One thing that did happen early on was, we took some inspiration from the WordPress project browser, and we did build, and I say we, and I mean Matt Grasmick, built a functional prototype, and did some work to push that up to the project_browser project, which was a previous iteration, I think, in Drupal 7 to build something like this. And we have access to that namespace now, and the 1X dev branch is compatible with Drupal 8 and 9. As I discovered recently, it does only work on PHP 7.4. So I filed an issue against it for that, because we should have 7.3 support for Drupal 8. But that is the best place where people can go today to get a sense of where we're headed. And I actually do have a sandbox of that set up. So if people don't, we want feedback from people who are low coders or no coders. So, I have a sandbox up at dev-pb1.pantheonsite.io where people can go in and just play with that demo now, and where the project is at right now is kind of, we're looking for feedback against this first iteration of an MVP. Is this useful to you? What would make it more useful, less useful? Our filters were just absolutely thrown out there. I could say Matt Grasmick did this in like a week. Just threw it together, put something up. It's using Svelte for the front end, sort of a progressively decoupled project browser. We're pulling data from more or less an unsupported API on Drupal.org. It's really thrown together. But on the other hand, it absolutely is a major step forward. So we're using this as a baseline, and we're trying to get feedback. And like where we're at right now is we're trying to develop a wireframe for what should be our MVP, what should be our goal. And until we know that, I can't really know a timeline for actually getting that implemented. But
So we should have a timeline by sometime next week, is what you're telling me?
I don't know how much feedback are people prepared to give.
We will also put the link to the sandbox in the show notes, so people can click on that and find it pretty easily.
So as we're going through this, I have a couple more questions or / suggestions maybe. I'm wondering if this is something you've thought about too, having a way to identify alternate modules, or like modules that will solve a problem in a similar way, both so that somebody can see what options there are, but also to be like, hey, you already have this module installed and you're trying to install this other thing that does the exact same thing. maybe you
Yeah,
should
like-
install that first.
Does Drupal.org even have like a related modules capability where you could say like, hey, here are like 6 modules that kind of all do the same thing, but in different ways?
It does, but it's fairly, it's not very well maintained. It's very hit or miss. But I'm curious if that's something that you've been talking about in the meetings as well.
Yeah, and we've had a lot of people doing a lot of really great thinking about different, like someone will get excited about one particular aspect of this and run with it and do some research and come back to the channel, and that's been super useful. So someone showed up with a open source AI recommendation engine that could even be implemented to say, like, by where with, the caveat with that is like it can come with some privacy concerns. So if you are thinking about people who installed this module also installed this other module, well, you are shipping some telemetry back to Drupal.org if you're going to be able to make those recommendations. And is that something that we want to do or not? But there's also manual, for example, one of the things that could happen with this project cleanup is that there is an idea of an ecosystem inside of Drupal, but what you do is it's basically a node reference, an entity reference from module B to its parent module A. So, you can reference the web form module. And so you can see things inside of an ecosystem, which are things that go along with some particular other module. But then this concept of categories that really needs to be cleaned up, right? So you might be looking at, I know I want to do newsletters, but there's definitely a lot of different ways to do that, where we might recommend, well, if you're in the newsletters category, we want to show you the MailChimp integration. We want to show you maybe simple news, and maybe we want to show you CiviCRM. Those are 3 very different things, but they all do newsletters, and solving that problem is about holding their hand through some of that, and that's a complicated problem.
I feel like we also need a non-toxic way to do module reviews, and I'm thinking something like even just a simple, like, talk about admin toolbar, because it's this week's module of the week. That's the kind of thing, like a way for me to say, as a Drupal developer, Drupal user, to say, this is a module I would recommend on every project. Or last week's module of the week was Twig Suggest. This is the kind of project I would recommend anytime you're doing component-based theming, right? Or something like Simple News. Like, I would recommend this module if you're doing a newsletter, like something like, this is the use case, this is when I would recommend it. And then people, they can, even if that goes on somebody's page, I could see like it being useful, like seeing like, hey, I'm looking at, Chris Wells' Drupal.org profile, and I can see, oh, he recommends these 4 modules for every project, and he recommends this one for newsletters and these ones for this use case, that kind of thing. Because one of the things that time and time again I hear on the podcast when we talk to developers, when they say like, hey, I'm working on this project with a new developer, one of the cool things is to find out what their mix of modules is, because everybody has a slightly different use case. And if we have a way to start presenting that so you don't have to happen to work with somebody on a project to find out what that is, I feel like that data would be really useful.
Go ahead, Amy June.
There is the star system, which I think a lot of people don't know about.
Yeah.
So I don't, but that's just someone's, star, and not a lot of feedback behind why they gave that star.
Jokingly, I was going to say, it sounds like Drupal.org needs to install the 5-star module, which is a star rating module. In reality, though, I'm wondering if enhancing Drupal.org profiles to have people select their favorite modules and display that on their profile is like a useful feature here, right? So within the project browser, and obviously not like for MVP, but like down the road, you could say like, oh, here are Dries' 6 top modules, or here's XJM's, 5 top modules, or, whatever, whoever the community member is. That could be a good way to see like, oh, Nick really likes these 3 modules right now, and how, how he suggests them or ranks them, or however you want to display that. But could be a useful use case.
Yeah, it feels like the existing star system, but what we don't have right now is we don't have any intent behind the stars. We just have stars, and it's like, I might star things for a different reason than John might. But if we were to put some guidance in, like, go star your favorite modules, and then it'll show on your profile as like Chris's favorite modules, well, then stars have a meaning that we can pull in. And what we're looking at is we are trying to come up with an algorithm to sort of recommend some modules, in some way that makes them bubble to the top, because 47,000 modules is a lot to wade through. But being able to just filter to say, I want recommended modules, what makes them recommended, and there's that idea of like, what data do we have now to base to write an algorithm to make a recommendation versus what could we have in the future, right? So we don't have 5-star ratings now. And I appreciate your methodology of like, or your terminology of saying we need a non-toxic way to do that. Like, 5-star ratings may or may not happen certainly not going to happen in the short term. I don't even know if they'll happen medium or long term, but like, does it have security coverage? Does it have, more than 1,000 installs, like that, those are useful criteria, but then they fall apart a little bit when you think about, well, this Salesforce module is not going to have more than 1,000 because not as many people are using Salesforce, but it is the absolute perfect module in a number of use cases, right? So I think use case is a very useful sort of taxonomy to classify modules, and is that category right now.
Yeah, and tie that star to that category, so that you can, because like I said, I feel like at the minimum, maybe not for MVP, but at the minimum, like end state thing that I would look at is allowing people to say their list, like allowing people to bubble up the list of modules that they always use every time, and starting to get more of a community census on these 8 or 10 modules 90% of people put on every site. And that gives good metrics for like what goes in core. Like, because for example, there's some core modules that I have the opposite reaction to, like Tor. I have uninstalled Tor on every single site that I've ever installed, but it's in core.
I make sure to go in and turn off comments, like
comments too.
Right after.
But although I have less of an issue with comments being in core, I don't really have an issue with core being in core. But yeah, comments. It's one of those things where I don't tend to build sites that need comments, but I believe that commenting should be a core functionality.
And one thing that core is a fun tongue twister between
Tor and core and Tor. And when you were saying Tor, I was like, we have like the Onion router browser built into Drupal. Like I wasn't even thinking the right thing. But one thing that we have to be wary of is what is our bias and what is our inclusivity here? Because this came up in the focus group after D4D was like, well, developers go and they reach for admin toolbar right away, but that might not be the use case for site builders, and maybe it is and maybe it isn't, but we need to make sure that, one thing that Dries pretty clearly specified when we were writing out the project brief was like, we want developers to use this tool for sure, high code people, but when given the choice over who to prioritize, we're prioritizing the low code people. So
interesting,
does coffee, which is one of my favorite modules, does that deserve that placement? Because does Devel deserve to be on the top 2, top 3 modules for a low coder?
I think Devel probably falls more into the developer camp of like needed modules than like admin toolbar and coffee to me feel like, UX site builder improvements.
I think everyone needs them, but that's, probably.
I never use coffee, but let's not go down that.
I mean, coffee, I guess, is kind of like an outlier. You either love it or you hate it. But I think like admin toolbar just makes the UI easier for people to use. And like everybody needs that. Right.
Yeah. I mean, I think it should be in core, but
I would also like to admit publicly, I was today years old when I found out that Drupal.org had a star system and I could star modules.
Really?
Exactly.
Yep.
Which is why that's the data we need to look at and see, is this useful or not useful? Because we don't know how it's being used.
I was thinking that the starring was actually like the following. When you follow an issue, I thought those two things were kind of the same thing. And I then realized that you can star modules. Nick,
I'm going to star every single, all 47,000 modules. So the next time Chris has to scrape it, he's like, this module has 0 installs, but it's still started by Nick. Why?
Yeah. And that's a lot of the work we're doing now is we're trying to figure out how to get this giant spreadsheet I made into a useful sort of querying tool. So we can say, how many modules have stars at all? How many modules like have more than one star that's the maintainer, and like trying to make the decisions around is stars a useful metric at all or not,
I have a question. I have a question there.
Go ahead, John.
Just came to mind, and I had it actually at Design for Drupal, but anyway, I just remembered it. Are you guys focusing on, or is there some thought on offline access? Because I imagine, like, if somebody installs Drupal locally, right, using like Lando or DDev or whatever, what if they don't have an internet connection? Is there some thought behind, like, I don't know, putting all this stuff in some sort of, or basic version of this stuff in some sort of JSON file to be able to make that still usable without an internet connection?
Yeah. And I know I have not had the opportunity to deep dive into Matt Grasmick's prototype at this point, but that's on the radar. But one thing I do know about it is that there is a proxy layer that's been kind of introduced. So the front end is not making calls directly to the Drupal API. Mm-hmm. It's making calls to a local endpoint, which then sort of relays the request to the Drupal API and then caches them. So you have the opportunity to, have faster requests as you make more and more queries. So I feel like there's a good opportunity to at least do some caching there, where we could fetch some data, an intermediate site, or there's opportunities there, and we're not quite at that stage, but sure. I think that would be something that is certainly up for consideration, whether or not that's MVP or comes later. But the good news is I think the intent is we built this middleware layer because sure. we know that the API to Drupal.org will be changing as they upgrade to Drupal 9. Mm-hmm. So our intent is to be able to sort of swap out that back end. It's also an opportunity for one requirement that we thought of was, for example, universities and higher education who have tons and tons of Drupal sites, mm-hmm. but they have like a vetted list of modules. They'll be able to sort of swap out that backend endpoint for their own directory or something like that, so that you can browse through, 200 projects that are supported by the university. And that's
so like an
sort
advanced feature is like use your own endpoint.
Yeah, roll your own endpoint, or a hook to filter out things that you say are on the deny list or the allow list or something. That's a requirement that we thought of.
And I would just like to interject here. Listeners, don't send me nasty grams. I know that a JSON file might not be the best way to store that data on your site. It was just an example. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Separate SQLite file. We'll do something terrible. Don't worry.
So to iterate, Chris, how can people get involved, and then what types of help is the initiative really looking for at this point in these initial phases?
Yeah, so many things. We are still new, we are still forming, so we are, like I said, still looking for leadership inside the initiative for a number of different areas. I think, like I said, what we're looking to get to is we are trying to define the MVP right now. We are trying to figure out, is this viable? Or what will make this viable? What will make this a useful tool? And trying to get to that 1.0 in the contrib space. That's sort of our first mile marker, and then we're trying to think ahead to how do we make this even better, and what determines what goes into Drupal core, because that is ultimately the goal, is that the project browser should ship with Drupal core. So right now we are looking for feedback on the user experience of the prototype. We're looking for UI considerations of where should the image go. We're looking at some point, we're going to be looking for people to help clean up our Drupal.org project metadata, and looking at those categories. We're looking for people who can do wireframing, and we're looking for people certainly who identify in this low-code site builder realm, because their feedback is super valuable. again, when I say we need to look at our biases, if this is written by developers for developers, we've missed the mark. We need to get people who are interested in the low code versions of Drupal and who are those people to say what they need. So probably the best way to chime in with that is to jump on the Drupal Slack in the project-browser channel. There's a number of us who are fairly active in there. Me, I have it starred in a useful way in Slack. That channel floats to the top, and I'm always checking that for any comments that people are making. We had some new people jump in after the D4D focus group who were participating in that group who have some design UI UX skills. We need to know what kind of filters are useful. We need to know how you're shopping for modules now and what criteria are you using to figure out if something's useful to you. How can we improve that for you? So, right now we're really looking for a lot of ideas and feedback, which is a great way to contribute. And I know that you should get credit for that. That is a non-code contribution that's very valuable to us. And so, if you join meetings and things, we're always trying to get an issue set up for that so that we can credit you with giving your feedback. So please jump in, and we, looking for a lot of ideation ideas right now.
Cool. And that's the project browser Slack channel.
Yeah, project-browser.
I have to say, as a side note, I'm really happy that these non-code contribution issue credit projects have really taken off. I don't remember who the first group was to do that, but it seems to have really taken off. And I think it's great. I mean, it really helps people to feel that the contribution is heard and recorded. So before we close the show, Chris, is there anything else that you would like our listeners to know about Project Browser? I mean, I'm way more excited about this project now at the end of the show than I was at the beginning. And I was pretty excited about it at the beginning. But yeah, I think it's fantastic. But is there anything that we didn't cover that you'd like to let them know?
Well, there's a few things that I can think of. One is, one thing I heard from the association recently that is really cool is we are working in the contrib space in the project_browser issue queue and stuff now. But core commit credits are sort of weighted a little bit more heavily. And one thing that's really neat is in the next couple of weeks, they'll be able to tag certain contrib projects as part of core strategic initiatives and be able to backfill that contrib credit. So I'm super excited about that. I absolutely selfishly am super excited by the so far choice of using Svelte as a front end framework because I've been wanting to dive into that. And I think it's probably the coolest one out there. So we'll see how that goes. And the other thing is that something that was really, I don't know what the right word is to describe this, but at the end of the day, the two people who stepped up are two cis white males. We're the initiative leads here, and I love that. I want to contribute, and I want to contribute in a meaningful way, but we have not kicked off our diversity in that way. So we're definitely looking for people. Anyone who wants to contribute, please feel welcome. That's my number one message here is this is new for me. And in a lot of ways, that's great. I'm a first-time initiative lead, first time like contributing in any like major meaningful way to Drupal. And I have the opportunity, and as Ron does, to kind of help steer the ship in that regard. So, we stepped up to be the initiative leads. We both were very interested in wanting to do that, but I want everyone to feel welcome here. So please come and give your feedback, no matter who you are.
If you have questions or feedback, reach out to us on Twitter at Talking Drupal. You can also connect with us on the Talking Drupal channel on Drupal Slack or email us at show@talkingdrupal.com. You can get show updates by signing up for our newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
And you can promote your Drupal camp on Talking Drupal. You can learn more about this at talkingdrupal.com/camp promo.
Thanks to James Shields for becoming our newest patron, and to all our current patrons that help make the production of Talking Drupal possible. To learn more about becoming a patron, you can go to talkingdrupal.com and choose Become a Patron.
Thank you for joining us, Chris. It's been a pleasure as always. And if our listeners wanted to get in touch with you, had any questions, what would be the best way for them to get in touch?
Anything project browser related, the Project Browser channel on Slack is great. You can also find me at Twitter at Chris from Redfin. I'm also at redfinsolutions.com or chrisfromredfin.dev.
Perfect. And Amy June, if our listeners had any questions for you, how could they get in touch with you?
It's Volkswagen Chick across all of the things.
And John Picozzi, if our listeners want to get in touch with you.
You can find me on all the major social networks and Drupal.org at John Picozzi, and you can find out about EPAM at epam.com.
And listeners can get in touch with me at Nixvan, NICXVAN, pretty much everywhere.
And if you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking. Have a good one, everyone.